Hello, everybody. I think we're going to get started with the conference in order to be on time and get out of here at a reasonable time. So this is the Hawaii Economics Association's annual conference. If you guys don't know, the Hawaii Economic Association is an all-volunteer organization that provides a venue where people can come together and discuss relevant economic issues. So if this is new to you, you like the discussion that we're having, this is interesting to you, I'd really suggest that you guys sign up. We have a year's worth of events, and a lot of them are really good. So this will be a long teaser for you today. So, and so one of the things that this annual conference makes the annual conference possible is sponsorships. And so if you look at our flyer, we have a long list of sponsors, but the main conference sponsor is the Maui Chamber of Commerce. And this would not be possible without the Maui Chamber of Commerce. So we really thank you for this. Pamela Tumpap, who is the president of the Maui Chamber of Commerce. She's been the president of the Maui Chamber of Commerce for 15 years. And even before that, she's been, it looks like a whirlwind of leadership on the island of Maui in the entire state of Hawaii. Before that, she was the president and CEO of Maui United Way and the director of marketing at Oceania at Time Warner Cable. So we're just gonna invite Pam up for just a couple minutes and have her offer some brief remarks. So thank you so much, Pam.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you, everyone. I think you can probably hear me if I stand back. My voice tends to carry. Happy Aloha Friday. This is a great day to be together. I just want to give out a special shout out to all of the economists in the room. Yours is clearly not an easy job. You examine millions, probably these days billions, of data points, trying to make sense of it all. And at the end of the day, what people do is question all of your assumptions and try and figure out if you're right, if you're wrong, and how far off you might be. It's really challenging to have all these people who have less knowledge than you in world economics try and figure out where you might not have gotten the mark right or where we need improvement. And you're also expected to give answers on things that we don't even collect data on. A good case in point was something that relates to the seminar, which is when we tried to find at the Maui Chamber of Commerce the real percentage of Hawaii's imported food, goods, and services. But we don't track all of the things coming into Hawaii's borders. And imagine if we did, the holdups we'd have in time and expense. So it's hard to be an economist these days and predict everything just perfectly. And as we look at all of these things and try and get the actual numbers, there's data that can be a little bit misleading, and it becomes a challenge. And that's why I understand what President Truman said when he said, I'd like to have a one-handed economist, because he was getting advice where on the one hand it looks like this, on the other hand it looks like this, and he thought a one-handed economist would be easier for taking the advice. But clearly we value your advice, which is why we're here today. And we value the advice of all the industry experts who've come as well. Therefore, it's my pleasure on behalf of the Maui Chamber of Commerce to be a title sponsor of this and to help businesses better understand and get needed information. We work in our community so our businesses in our community can thrive. And we want to thank all of the presenters and the economists and the Hawaii Economic Association. If you're not part of the Hawaii Economic Association, especially after today, I highly encourage you to join. Membership is very inexpensive, and I promise you, if you're active, you're going to get a great return on your investment. I also want to encourage you that if you do business across regions in Hawaii, be a member of every chamber where you do business in. And I want to encourage you to think about this. I do a lot of work in politics, and I really wish economics was a required course in a political science degree. Just a suggestion. And lastly, I want to say to all of the economists, I'm going to try really hard, because clearly I do not have anywhere close to the knowledge you have, to be questioning your theories and assumptions. On the other hand, I understand that's part of the process too. Thank you so much for being here today. We look forward to a great day. Aloha.
Thank you so much, Pam. We really appreciate it. While we're on thanking people, I would like to offer a couple other thanks. First of all, I would like to offer a thanks to our fearless leader, Leslie Harvey, who's the HEA president. Thank you so much. This wouldn't be possible without you. I'd also like to thank Heather Walters. She's the newest member of our team. She did a lot of the admin work, and this would not be possible either. So thank you so much, Heather. And then I also want to extend a lot of gratitude to my fellow conference committee members. So this is Colin Moore, Jen Chun, Jerry Sumida, and Laren Tamai. All of us had spent 6 months trying to put together this conference, thinking the best way to communicate these ideas and share with you important concepts and important things that we need to debate as a society and the best way to transmit that, right? And so what I really hope to accomplish here today is that we can have a really important discussion that's an ongoing discussion over decades or years and even decades about what is the type of future that we want. Now, economics is, I believe it's a very powerful tool. And one of the really powerful tools it offers as a discipline is it talks about trade-offs, right? And so there's no free lunch, and famously no free lunch in economics, but we talk about like, okay, you can either have this or that, and we can compare that and look at the trade-offs, right? And you know, as we think about Hawaii's future, we can't have everything that we want, right? All of us would love a society where, you know, there was no tourists, homes were cheap, we had plentiful jobs, high-income jobs, tech jobs, but that's just not going to happen, right? I mean, some of it could happen, right? And also we're like super compliant with our respectful of our environment and our cultural values and everything, right? So we just can't have it all. And so one of the things that we're doing here is we're going to talk to a lot of our business leaders and just hear about the problems and the issues that they're facing and ask, okay, why is Hawaii so costly? And then eventually we'll get to the question of like, okay, what can we do about this, right? And this is a very important question. And this is a question that's been around for a long time. So I am holding up this priceless and wonderful book called The Price of Paradise, right? Price of Paradise is a book that looks at why Hawaii costs so much money. Now, believe it or not, this book came out in 1992, 30 years ago. Some of the authors are in this room, and if you read this book today, it is as relevant today, if the problems are almost more acute now than they were about 30 years ago. So my question to you is, why are we still discussing the same issues 30 or 40 years later? And this conference, I'd like to offer or make a conjecture that we're looking at the problem the wrong way. Most of the time when we look at the problem, we immediately think of income, right? So we're like, oh, we need to diversify the economy. Oh, we need higher incomes. Oh, there's special segments of our society that where we need to provide either a tax credit or some kind of subsidy. That's important. I never want to diminish the importance of income or all these issues, right? But how well is that approach been doing for us? We've been doing the same approach for the last 40 years. So this is like the impetus for this conference, right? So the conference is titled, Why is Hawaii So Darn Expensive? Exploring the supply side constraints of Hawaii's high cost of doing business. So we're looking at the supply side cost. We're not looking just at the demand. The demand is about income. The demand is about, how we should redistribute everything. But at the end of the day, the reason why Hawaii costs so much is it's a collection of multiple different choices that we make as a society about how we want to live, right? And so we're going to be spending time with business owners, people who work in business, and just asking them a straightforward question. What's driving your costs, right? And this is a huge issue, right? So it hurts low-income people, but I've talked to a lot of business owners, and these are business owners of local firms that have been in Hawaii for generations that really care about this community. And their high-level managers are leaving for the mainland because at, presumably over $100,000 salary, they feel like they can't make it here, right? So this problem has become more and more acute about what's going on. And so, when I work at the legislature, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name's Seth Colby. I'm the Tax Research and Planning Officer. So in day job, I deal a lot with decision makers within the state, right? Right now, I'm acting as part of the Hawaii Economics Association. But I see a lot of policies and proposals, and everybody just wants everybody to have more income. But here's a report that gets a lot of currency at the ledge. It's called the ALICE report. The ALICE report is put out by the United Way, and they identify the segment of the population that follows this acronym: asset limited, income constrained, and employed. So these are the people who are working, who are doing everything that they can, but they can't make ends meet, right? And they identify this percentage of the population. So they can't cover the basic necessities like food and housing like that. So right now, it is 33% of the population. If you include people with the people in poverty, there are the ones that have access to most of our social services, like food stamps, tax credits like that. It's 43% of the Hawaii's population. Now, the ALICE population has increased 22% since 2007. Now, I would argue that's not because we fell in income. I would argue that's because it's an increase in costs. And so when we're talking about the business environment, when we're talking about issues of cost, we're not just talking about ways to maximize profits for business owners. We're talking about providing important services to allow people to live here on these islands, right? And that's what we're going to explain and look at today. So this is my proposal to you. We're going to think about this issue slightly different than what most people do in this state. Rather than just focusing on tax credits, rather than just focusing on making sure raising the minimum wage. And I don't want to diminish the importance of all of that. To think about what is driving up our costs and why can't business owners who are working day and night, supply the things that we want. In other parts of the country, it works, right? So I'm gonna start off with some really basic. You're gonna have to humor me. I teach economics, so I like graphs. And this is the supply and demand graph, right? It's a oldie but a goodie. And I just want to go over the basics of what we're doing, right? So let's see if I don't know if I can point there. Anyway, hopefully you guys can see this. And anybody who knows how to present a graph has to talk about the matrices first and what's what. So on the left hand, we have the level of price. And on the bottom level, the x-axis, we have the quantity demanded, right? And on the downward sloping slope with the D next to it, that's the demand curve. And this is the basic idea that the cheaper something gets, the more we want of something. So if cars were $10 a piece, we would all have way more cars than we do. If cars were $20 million a piece, there would be very few cars in the world. On the other side is the supply curve, and that's the supply that goes up, or that's the curve that goes up. And that's saying that if they could only sell cars for $10 a piece, very few companies would produce a car for $10 a piece. But if there's $20 million, there's a lot of people that would be providing cars because it would exceed their costs, right? Very simple. Now, what we're talking about today is supply. So we're talking about S1 right here. And when our government and what we are always trying to do is we're trying to boost income, right? And so one way of boosting income, that increases demand because we can all afford more goods and services. So we shift to the right. Now, what you'll see is we move from Q1 to Q2, so we demand a little more things, and P1 goes to P2. So things cost a little bit more. That's in a functioning economy. I'm going to posit to you that the things that we care most about in Hawaii, the things that we're always arguing, our economy does not look like this. It looks more like this. So what you'll see is our supply curve is not responsive to price. It just goes up, right? And if I was teaching a lecture, I would call that the inelasticity of the supply curve. right? But ignore that, it doesn't matter. What I'm trying to point out here is we have a very hard time supplying more goods when things get more expensive here. And you can think about this, the classic issue is housing. Housing has gone up 3 or 4 or 5 times in the last 30 years, and has housing supply increased 3 or 4 or 5 times more? No, we're going to look at a housing supply panel, and it is basically, we make it semi-illegal to build housing in Hawaii, right? And there are people who want to provide goods and services to society, but they can't for a number of reasons, some of which we're going to talk about today. So this is the issue with Hawaii. You know, we make this hard, and we're going to talk with restaurateurs. I would argue with the permitting process and things like that, it's very hard to supply new things. If somebody sees an opportunity, they can't jump on it very quickly. It's stagnant, right? So what we're going to try to do and what I think we need to do as a society is think about how we can make that supply curve more responsive. How can we allow people more responsive to price? So that concludes my economic lecture for today. Now, so the fact that Hawaii is a super high cost state and has trouble delivering services is actually, for Hawaii, it's been around for a long time, but it's happening in a lot of other cities in the United States, right? It's happening in the Bay Area, most coastal cities along the West Coast and the East Coast. And, you know, one of the things that I've read in the press is people that are operating within progressive politics, liberal or in the Democratic Party, are asking this fundamental question. If being a progressive means offering as many opportunities to people as possible and creating equitable outcomes, how come the cities that are governed by these parties do not offer opportunities to these people? And this is spurring a lot of people all around the United States to think about things. And it's coming under a movement called supply-side liberalism. And this is the idea of questioning why are people moving away from the places that are offering most opportunity? Why is it so hard to live in these places? And part of the issue is we've been focusing on demand for the last 30 or 40 years. If, this segment needs something, let's just give it to them. Oh, we need more income, let's generate more income. Now, in the Bay Area, in Seattle, in New York, they have super competitive industries producing immense amount of wealth. In Hawaii, we don't have that. We have tourism, and it looks like people are pretty tired of pushing on that and utilizing tourism as the engine of growth, and we have the government, right? And the government is good, it's stable, but it's limited. So what are we gonna do to push things forward? Now, everybody, when we do this, people think, oh, we should do this industry, we should do this industry. I have an alternative idea, and this is what we're gonna think about today. What if we created a business environment that was conducive so entrepreneurs could figure out what works and what doesn't? So, you know, one of the opportunities here is to improve Hawaii's business environment. And despite what you hear in the press, actually economists agree on what is the essential things needed for a good business environment, right? You need a government that provides a stable environment, which is rule of law, basic property rights. You allow reasonable levels of competition, so people fail and people succeed, and people are rewarded for that. And then you invest in your people and provide a reasonable social safety net. That is not a very controversial thing. There's economists in this room, you can push them. Most of them will agree on that. Where they disagree are how to do that, right? Which makes sense. But why is creating a business environment so important? It's because being an entrepreneur is really hard, right? Being an entrepreneur is you have to worry about your clients, you have to worry about the market, you have to worry about your employees, all these things. Now, wouldn't it be better for the entrepreneur if they also didn't have to worry about the state and the government? right? And that's what the business environment is like trying to make it easier diminish the amount of risk that these people are taking on so they can focus on the things that matter most. And most entrepreneurs fail. That is true. And it's only the lucky ones and the really talented ones that succeed. And so we have to, just because you succeed, oftentimes you need to be rewarded for that because 3 or 4 times before that, they failed, right? And so we need to think about how we want to generate this and how we want to create these opportunities here in Hawaii. Hawaii is famous for having a bad business environment, right? For 30 years, actually for 40 years. If you read all the things, it's been around forever. Now, there's 2 reasons for that. One, we're the most isolated island chain in the world. So there's inherent costs and things are going to cost more money. But I would contend that there are a lot of things that we have control over, that we can make decisions about how we want to structure our society that would make it more business friendly and allow people to come and compete. And so this is what this conference is here to do. We're going to be starting to address and look at this issue. We're not going to answer all the questions, or we're not even going to have any. I doubt we're going to have very many good solutions right now. But this is going to be part of an ongoing process. Now, most economic conferences, we would invite a bunch of economists like me or Eugene or Jack, and we would come and show a bunch of charts and kind of opine on why we think you need to do. We're not going to do it this way. Today, we're going to do something different. We're going to just sit and we're going to go straight to the source. We're going to sit down with people who are struggling every day in Hawaii's business environment and ask them the questions, why is everything so expensive here? And see what they have to answer, right? Because these are the people who are driving it forward. I have a state salary. I'm fine, right? And no matter what I say, I still get paid. Entrepreneurs not like that. If they do something wrong, they don't get paid. So we should be listening to them more than we should be listening to us. And as we talk about things, we're going to be dividing things into 2 set categories. And I would like all of you guys to take this mental note. Things that we have control over, which is policies, permitting, what we want, and things we don't have control over, which is supply chains, high logistics costs. We may have control over some of them, but not all of them, right? So we should be making a mental list in our mind as we listen to these entrepreneurs and think, okay, can we do something about that? Or can we not? Is this a fact of life? Essentially, I'm asking you guys to take some kind of economic version of the serenity prayer, if you've ever heard this, which is grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So in my previous career, I worked in international development. And so I would go around the world and I would look at study cases of how societies and economies could develop more quickly. And the idea was we wanted to increase the welfare of their populations. International development is a pretty depressing industry because it's hard to change things in societies. Most people stay the same. But I would go around and I would see certain cases, success cases. And there was a commonality to those success cases. It was when leaders from business leaders, it was when civil society leaders, young people, academics, all got together and they said, this is the future we want for our society, and this is where we're gonna go with that. And during that conversation, they had to deal with the inherent trade-offs of their future. They can't have everything. So what are they going to do? And once they decided, it's a lot easier to move forward. I've always thought that Hawaii would really participate from or benefit from this type of conversation about deciding where they want to go, what fundamental values they want. And you know what? If we have super high costs for certain things that we really value, then so be it. But at least we can stop complaining about it. You know? And so there's something incredibly powerful about making proactive, affirmative decisions in life. You don't have to be passive. And we shouldn't forget that by not making a decision, we are making a decision. And I would argue that a lot of the things that were identified 30 years ago in this book have not been addressed because we haven't made the hard decisions, right? So what I would propose to all of you guys today is that you use this conference to be part of that larger conversation that we're having. And that all of you guys obviously care. You've paid $100 and something to be here. Presumably, I'm sure the lunch will be good, but I'm sure that's not what you're paying for. You're paying for the fact that to learn and to be part of this conversation. So, during the breaks, during what you think, as your colleagues going out, talk about this issue and think about where we want to go, because we are all responsible for things. And if it's the permitting, rather than just say, oh, the government doesn't work here, it's all issue, it's their problem. No, we have control over how the government acts. That's hard. It's a hard lift. I work for the government. I know how hard it is to get things done there. But if we wanted to change things, we could. We're a democratic society. And we have there's a huge advantage that Hawaii has. It's small. You can understand Hawaii and get leaders together in a conference like this and make important decisions. You can't do that in California. You can't even do that in a state like Nevada. But in Hawaii, you can, right? So we have an opportunity to decide how we want to go forward. So today is, when we have these conversations, I think there's a tendency to immediately jump on solutions. So from my experience in international development, if you show up and you think you have a solution, you're probably going to be wrong. So what I would like to encourage all of us to do is to listen. Just to listen and learn and allow this to be the beginning of a conversation. And then you take that information and we decide what to do with it next, individually and collectively. We have a great conference laid out. We have 4 different panels and a keynote speaker. So the first panel, which we're going to bring up in a second, we focus on restaurants. Now, restaurants, we're using this as a lens to understand small businesses and medium-sized businesses. What's really driving up their costs? Then we're going to go with residential housing. I don't think this is going to be very popular. This is going to be very informative. I don't think it's controversial at all to say that we have some problems in supplying housing here in Hawaii, and there's a lot of things that we can do about it. Then we're going to, for the keynote, we're going to be looking at the logistics sector. It's something I don't know very much about, but I'm very much looking forward to, about how much it costs and what are the things that we have to worry about getting things to our islands. We're going to be looking at agriculture. Agriculture is a thing that a lot of people, for values and for reasons, care deeply about, right? We're going to learn about, we've been trying to promote agriculture for the last 50 years to mediocre results, and we're going to just talk to the business owners and say, why is it so hard? Then we're going to follow up. We have the last panel is the economic forecasting panel. It's a bread and butter for us, but the economic forecasting panel is a little different from everything else. The first 3 panels are looking at the things that we have control over, right? These are the microeconomic climates of Hawaii. The forecasting panel is what's happening in a broader scale. This is going to help us inform to make a guess about what's going on, and so how we can act and best act to promote to flourish in spite of the environment or because of the environment, right? So this is all together. We're going to just jump right into the restaurant panel right now. So we're going to start off with Kyle Shelly. Kyle Shelly is a senior vice president and director at the American Savings Bank. He's a prominent member of our society. And one of the reasons I thought it would be very good to start off with a banker is most people don't really understand banking. Most people think banking is just about giving money. But bankers have a much bigger role in this. They sit around and they have an innate incentive to help their clients flourish. If Hawaii doesn't do well, American Savings Bank doesn't do well, right? So they're providing expertise. They read a business plan and say, oh, well, you know what? I've read a lot of business plans, and this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this cost is probably not a good assumption. And also, they make important connections to make their business thrive. So we're going to bring up Kyle. Thank you so much for coming, and we really look forward to your presentation.
Good morning. Thank you to the HEA for having me up here. Definitely feel blessed. First time to do something like this. So just a little bit about me. I grew up on Guam, born and raised. And then when I was 16, I left to go to San Diego, and I lived there for 10 years. I started working during the Great Recession, or just before it. And that was really the event for me that led me to choose something else for my life, which was come to Hawaii. I took a pay cut to come here, but I chose quality of life, and that has different values and meanings to me versus something monetary. But it was very tough. And even my first home purchase, I felt very lucky. I was a reserved affordable housing purchaser, and I had to go through the lottery and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if I would still be here if it wasn't for things like that. So I care very much about the state and want to stay here, and I call this my home. So yes, I am a banker. I have a joke up there. Why did one man decide to become an economist after being in banking for 25 years, and he lost interest? So I'm not an economist, but as Seth said, I am a banker, and we do have a very central part in the Hawaii economy. Essentially what we do is we take, our depositors' money and we lend that out with prudence. So we're very much risk managers. But we want to do that in productive ways. We want to do that where we're creating our own future customers in the state. And so that's something we very much care about, in addition to all the cash management and, fraud prevention services and, things that banks can offer to streamline and, operate your business. Feel free to ask questions along the way, but, I think maybe we'll hold those for the end. Okay. I wanted to start here with just sort of the headliner. I know Seth said, we're not going to go into charts and graphs and explain my opinions, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. Maybe in a different way an economist would do it. But, if you think about our economy, there's the headliners, right? We have unemployment's coming down, rapid recovery. That's very good. Our visitors are strong. We're pacing, just behind 2019 levels over the last few months. So a pretty decent recovery. But there are risks out there that are persistent. So increasing cost of capital, that's a big one. And that's one that's going to hit us, again, for the rest of this year. Tight labor market, that's a pretty consistent theme. Ongoing inflation, supply chain challenges. We isolated island chain, 99% of what we have that gets brought in is imported. And then construction and real estate. I had all these nice transitions for this volcano and all that kind of stuff, but it just plopped it all on there. But these risks are out there, and if they're unchecked and they continue to fester and even increase, then what could happen? We may go into recession. So on these two figures that we just went over, which was the visitor arrivals, so the top chart there, you can see the very top line is pre-COVID, basically, 2019. And the line just below that is our 2022. So you can see we're basically pacing, visitor arrivals. And, that's largely been the domestic market. So international travelers are still lagging. Japan is very much not, is not a strong visitor arrival. So that may be a tailwind for us moving forward. On the labor side, you can see here this historical chart here. We've had 2%-ish unemployment rate before the pandemic, and then we shot up, and then now we're coming back down to 3.8%. 2% is a very strong number. That's not typical for the US, and I have my own reasons for that. And we'll get that here. So labor. What I wanted to do today was, not just put up a bunch of graphs, but really try to give the audience some color of what I hear from my customers or, business acquaintances. And so this is real on the labor side. So if you look there, the top left, it was hard before the pandemic. Now it's 10 times harder. And you think about that, we're at 3.8% unemployment, 2% before the pandemic. But that person's saying it's harder. Half of the applicants failed the drug test. That's a transportation business. They got to drive vehicles. so they got to take the drug test. Half of them are failing. A restaurant had to close for lunch because they don't have the staff shortages, or they have staff shortages, and those individuals likely want to serve dinner service, higher tickets, right, better tips. Dealing with no-shows, interviews, nobody shows up, they're just applying. I don't know if they're trying to game the unemployment system, but that's a lot of, I've heard that multiple times. Inability to hire, so they're tolerating bad behavior, right? Maybe they don't show up for their shift, can't really fire them, I need that body. So that, those are real struggles that I think any business, an entrepreneur, needs to be aware of, and it's not a good thing. Interviewing individuals with prior convictions. Quality of candidates are low, that's a medical service business. Entry level, mid-level. So I think this slide, I just wanted to impress on everyone here that, the labor market is very tight, and in my opinion, it's out of balance. The demand is too strong for what the supply is. And that's why we have the Fed is dropping the hammer, basically, on us with their interest rate increases. But before we get into that, this slide here, I wanted to try, okay, why is that? Why are we having, this issue, which has been, honestly, been built up for a long period of time? The graph on the left there is our labor participation rate. And, we always talk about unemployment rate, but I really feel like when we talk about unemployment, we need to look at both unemployment rate and our labor participation, and then also what our population is doing. And that's what I wanted to show here on this slide. So our labor participation, which is the blue line, because I've given you an eye test here, trying to see the top left of that graph. So the blue line is Hawaii, and the green line would be the nation. And you've seen our labor participation decline. And what that is employed, individuals that are employed or unemployed, right, seeking employment, divided by the population. So we've had a declining labor participation rate. And I think, there's natural reasons for that. Baby boomers retiring, so they get pulled out of the labor market. Or if there's individuals wanting to go back to school, they also would be pulled out of the market. But we've declined at a relatively quicker pace than the rest of the nation. You overlay that with our population being stagnant. So you see there on the top right, we've had basically negative population growth, and that's not a good recipe. We have a pie of population, and we don't have an expanding labor participation pool. And so if our economy is going to grow, we don't have the supply of labor to service that. This was one of the business owners that vents to me a lot. They've either moved away, which is true, or they've figured out other income streams, and that's what the pandemic maybe thrusted them into doing. Maybe they didn't consider being an Uber driver or a Lyft driver before, but now they're doing it, and now they're accustomed to it, and they're not going to return to the job that they had. So that was one of the expressions of a business owner. And then there's Turo, renting out your car. I know a few people doing that. Even I've considered that. Or maybe they started a venture. Maybe they started their own business. So I do think that there is some permanence to the labor market having additional competition or different outlets for individuals. And I just personally see the labor tightness persisting. The last one here is unfilled jobs. That was a nice stat in DBED's press release, 17,500 unfilled, and most of that was healthcare and I think tourism related. I'm sure there's somebody here from DBED that could correct me if I'm wrong. All right, the cost of capital. Work at a bank. This is my business. The Fed is set to destroy demand. They see the imbalance and they want to correct it as much as possible. Inflation is the biggest risk, and price stability is their mandate. So inflation really does, if it's excessive, it really does burden the population that cannot handle it the most. So if we look here, the top left graph, you see what our 30-year mortgage is. Hopefully everybody here refinanced right before it went up. But yeah, we're at 5.66%, and that was as of September 1st. I think it's 5.89% average yesterday. That is having a meaningful drag on our refinance activity or home purchasing activity, so we see that in the bank. And then we have the classic yield curve here on the bottom left, and it's inverted. And for folks that don't know, an inverted yield curve usually is a predictor of a recession, especially if the duration of that yield curve stays inverted for a longer period of time. So that's an ominous sign. However, we still have strong labor market and strong job growth, and so there's some mixed signals there. But this is very much telling us that investors and market participants are expecting weakness. The Fed funds expectations, so right now it's 2.25%, 2.5%, so we expect to end the year at 3.5%. That's the last kind of market participation data we have. So expect the Fed to hike, another 50, 75 basis points and more after that. And the Fed chair has been very consistent in his message that they will continue to hike. So expect that. And that has a immediate impact for businesses, entrepreneurs here in Hawaii. When the rates increase, there's usually there's a commensurate increase in our interest rates at the banks for floating rate bars. And that's typically working capital lines of credit. So when you think about a business wanting to buy inventory or finance their receivables, that interest rate is hitting them the same day that the Fed is hiking that interest rate. So the cost of doing business, does go up, and that will have an impact. All right, inflation. I wanted to give more, color from what I hear from businesses. And here's some examples. Electrical component for my project went from $17,000 to $85,000. It's a lot more than that 6% number. Wage inflation, had to increase wages 25% just to retain the staff. Electrical cost going up. We've seen that in the press. That's not a surprise. Materials cost, 33%. I will say, though, that for the customers and businesses that are able to, they have been able to successfully pass on those costs to the consumer. And ultimately, we're burdening that. And when you hear Seth talk about, the Alice report, you wonder when is it going to break? So inflation, this is the data point from DBED, 6.7% for the first half of 2022. There are some signs that is abating. And most of the forecasts do see that, easing towards the end of the year and into 2023. So let's hope that that's true. But with Ukraine, China, Russia and all that, those are all wild cards. Supply chain. So this is interesting, and I think Hawaii has actually done relatively better than I thought they would. We're an isolated island chain, really subject to the air freight and shipping freight. And Matson and Pasha, they've done, in my opinion, a resilient job in making sure that the flow and the logistics of it has been intact. What I've seen is more of like in the mainland rail, get clogged, or at one point there was 100 ships or something like that waiting at the ports of LA. So our supply chain is really, when I look into it, it's really the procurement or sourcing of it. Is the manufacturer able to produce it? Is that material or part available? And so, here you can see that there's, quotes again from different businesses. Vehicles is a very one that's, I think, out there. 15 vehicles on the lot. Normally they have 300. In Hawaii, there's a lot of businesses that move stuff. So you need the vehicles. Delivery time of certain components completely delayed, significantly. And that makes it very difficult for projects or businesses to plan out a project, to finance it. How are we going to do that, with predictability? And that becomes very difficult. I can't get a new oven. That's a pizza oven. Not all the food ingredients are available. However, I have seen, some resiliency on the restaurant side, being able to mix up their menu, or their distributors are able to help them with picking different ingredients that are a reasonable cost, so they could still provide a service. On the construction side here, there's a data point, private construction permit value down 52%. I will say I haven't corroborated that with my construction clients. Most of them have healthy backlogs well into 2023. So I'm hoping that's more of a blimp and that the activity will pick back up again. But the procurement of steel, glass, concrete, probably add in paint into that, those are all still issues that are likely going to persist. So thoughts. I'll say that the last recession was a financial crisis, Great Recession, and in this market today, the banks have very healthy balance sheets and liquidity. And so I definitely do not foresee anything similar to the last recession from a banking perspective. In fact, I think that's going to help, if anything, a soft landing, where I think credit, lending will be available, and it's not going to be severely restricted like it was in the last recession. So that's one takeaway. And the other one for me was the inverted yield curve does, have an ominous predictability for a recession, but, it's mixed data in terms of we have still really strong labor market and jobs growth, and I don't know if we've seen that before. And then the international visitor, I think will probably provide some tailwind and help buffer Hawaii. And so hopefully all those things, help us either avoid a recession or soft landing. So that's my presentation for today. I'll take any thoughts or questions. Yes.
If there is a recession in Hawaii soon, will those interest rates go down again, and can we refi?
If I could accurately predict interest rates, I'd probably be a billionaire and be somewhere else. But generally, if there is a recession, I would generally say that the Fed would then start to probably look at easing. And so then rates naturally would reverse and go down. In fact, that is the expectation from a lot of the big banks, is inflation will pare down and then we'll start to see an easing, at least the Fed taking the foot off the gas. So interest rates may potentially peak next year. But again, it's very difficult to predict. And anybody that says they know what it's going to do don't believe them. But yeah, that's a possibility, maybe 2024, if I were to, make an educated guess. Thank you.